May I have a question?
Sir.
Okay, the accountability process, that is very well said, and I practice it, almost every night. I wanted to know what happened to the humanity that some of the people whose either conscience is dead, that they commit all kind of sins or corruption or whatever you could say, why they do not do that process.
Hmm.
What ingredient or what chemical reaction happens in their mind that distracts them, that their accountability process is totally zero,
Right.
and they have spent more than their half of their life or half century, more than that, in that very state of fear, thinking that they are
Hmm.
right, and they will not go with the process of
Hmm.
repenting,
Hmm.
finding out that yes, sorry, we did it that,
Hmm.
or yeah, that is, I wanted to
Okay.
know what is that thing which does not happen in those category of
Right.
people, which the way you and me we mention, I do it every day, every day.
Hmm.
It is absolutely the right way to do. What, did I hurt anybody, or
Hmm.
I have a wonderful sleep night, enjoy
Right.
myself?
Uh-huh.
That is my
Okay,
question.
the Quran has actually answered this question. It has said that people who lose this urge to correct themselves is basically a punishment from God, because they are the people who when they lose this urge, God starts to punish them, and in this punishment, the ultimate form is that they lose track of right and wrong. So when they end up with a dead conscience, it is because they have repeatedly misused their conscience. They have repeatedly not followed their conscience. So as a result, as a punishment, God makes them, creates in them this lack of awareness between good and evil. So basically, it's like a punishment inflicted upon them for their own bad behavior of repeatedly misusing and not following their own conscience.
That is superb that they are being punished by themselves.
Right.
Okay. But the society gets punished.
As well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And if they are in the leadership class, then it is the whole country or
Right.
whole society gets punished.
Uh-huh.
And who is responsible for it?
Obviously, the people who themselves do this are
But
responsible.
then
But
God doesn't.
as we,
But then God doesn't come to help and
I
endure
mean,
that very situation.
God does come to our help, and it tells us, you see, what we need to do is that we must create a system of education, of instruction, in which this basic morality in people, which is already found in us, is further systematized, is further given incentive in our younger forming years. So, you see, I can give you the example of Japan. I've studied their system of education. What happens is that from a very earlier age, these values that we call core values like sympathy, kindness, speaking the truth, etc., they are made to follow these values in a practical way. Thus, for example, they will give one semester to each value, and then what will happen is that they will create activities around those values, so that instead of having a classroom instruction, they are made to follow a certain routine. Thus, for example, when they would be teaching sympathy to a child, I mean, when I say a child, a grown up child, they would typically taken to a hospital or an hospice or some place or an orphanage, and they would be made to spend time like an hour or so and assign some time so that they could come in contact with such people. Similarly, when they would make people or make children teach responsibility, what they would do is that they would give them a flower pot, a seed, some manure, some mud, and they would tell them that in 15 days this plant is going to sprout, but it's not going to sprout unless you give the attention, the time, so that they create this sense of responsibility in them. So the point that I'm trying to make is that it is an important education system, very good role models in the form of your parents, in which in the forming years, in the very forming years, children are motivated through this activity based learning, and while seeing and observing their parents and role models, that this is how human beings should be. So I think it's like a structural change. It's a change in the society. It's a change in which we ourselves hold ourselves accountable before our own children, because we are going to make or break them. So once we have children, we have to behave ourselves even more and become role models for them. So it's like a all-embracing strategy that we need to follow as a society, I would say.
Yeah, I have concluding marks on the same very question. I did my own research on this one, and I found out that the way the when God Almighty has created the world, it is a cyclical world. We have haves and then we have have-nots. Haves, they will, deprived of in the next second or third generation, then they will become have-nots, and have-nots will become haves of the future. So God knows whatever is happening. Like when sometime we say something is happening to Palestinian people or some other people, the cruelty is happening. So God, why don't you come and help that very situation? So my conclusion within myself, that's what I thought, that God purposely created that kind of world in which we have haves and have-nots, in which there will be cruelty, in which there will be the one ruled and the rulers. And this is the way this will continue. It has been continued in the past, and that will continue. So I have taken it the way the whole world is.
So you see, it's like taking for granted something, the class difference which God has created, and God actually has said these words in the Quran, that we have created these class difference in order to test you and try you, because these difference in society in which we have certain haves and have-nots, they create a system in which trials and tribulation and test, which is the basic purpose for which we have been created, it comes into place. So this is a means of trying and testing mankind as well. So I agree with you.
I have a
Yes, ma'am.
question. So, you know how earlier you said that for depression to practice
Gratitude therapy.
gratitude therapy. So, is there something similar to that that you would recommend people for, anxiety or overthinking?
I think anxiety and overthinking is something which perhaps would need medical intervention, because the anxiety and overthinking is a way in which you have become accustomed to. I'm not talking about going to a psychiatrist. I would rather suggest a psychologist, like a psychotherapist. You see, overthinking and anxiety are human behaviors which have developed as a result of something which might have happened in the past. So, what these psychotherapists do, they talk to you about your past, they talk to you about your experiences, and they try to discover that missing link that you might not discover yourself. So, I think anxiety and overthinking is perhaps best dealt with if you go to a good psychologist.
Okay. And one more thing I have to ask. So, you know how you were asked to read the Quran and
Right.
you get the
Uh huh.
the sawab for
Uh
it.
huh.
And for the month of Ramadan, we're told to read. It's good to read
Hmm.
Quran and finish it. So, if someone is reading English Quran, is it considered is it considered the same?
I hope so. It does, because you see, this famous thing which has become very popular amongst ourselves, that whenever you read a letter of the Quran, for every letter you get 10 rewards. I mean, that's nakiyan. This is an absolutely weak hadith. It is an inauthentic narrative. There is no such thing as reading one letter and getting 10 rewards or 10 units of reward. So, as I said, if you're not able to read Quranic Arabic, if you're just being able to read the translation, that is quite good. But I would say the ultimate is to read and understand the Quranic Arabic. But it's a step less. And of course, it is better than nothing, to do nothing. And just reading the text of the Quran without understanding it, I don't find any logic in that.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. Sorry. So thank you first of all for your time. I got two questions that have one has bothered me for a while, or rather confused me, and the second one, just now when you said something, has started confusing me. Okay, so the first one is you started with the Quran being authentic, and we know with Tarawatur and all those things, so no doubt in that. But all the other books have been in different languages, and we don't have those in original languages.
Original language.
So we can easily say, oh, they've changed it or whatever, what the popular stuff is out there, right? But in Quran, Allah Ta'ala commands you. In fact, He makes it a condition of iman that you have to follow prophets
Previous,
before
right.
and books before, right? Yet He does not make any effort to save those books, right? And we do have Quran. I can understand that, I was reading Genesis and I found some portion of Surah Yusuf in there. But Allah Ta'ala in Surah Yusuf says something like, this is was missing, and we are giving you the news, right? So my question is, why is it like that? And the second question I had, which just confused me, you said something about you can do the third thing by opening Quran anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
I So for our school of thought, if I can point out one achievement, is, where I'm going, right? The coherence, right? Nazm.
Mm-hmm.
Without Nazm, I will read Surah Tawbah and start shooting people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So why are you suggest? Is this because you are saying that, okay, get used to it and then start getting into it?
That's it. That was
Okay.
the reason. I mean, it's like acclimatizing yourself. I'm not saying otherwise. You see, when you read Surah Tawbah and you find God saying that chop off the heads of the disbelievers, obviously this would raise this question,
Right.
and you would consult some scholar or maybe some tafsir to find out. So what I was trying to say is that if you want yourself to be acclimatized with the Quran, so this is how you should do it. It's like opening up the Quran, making yourself familiarized with it, and making yourself more closer to it. So it's
See, I read your book, and it kind of builds up, right? Surah Fatiha says, "Idina Sirat al-Mustaqim," and Allah Ta'ala right away answers, "Zalika al-kitabu la rayba fihi," right? Hudan if
right.
you believe,
Right. But then
right?
you see, as soon as you cross those verses, you find the history of the Bani Israel, you find this Satan and everyone. So you see what
But they make a
happens is,
bigger argument, right?
right, because you see, you're already well read in these things.
Okay.
So I was talking about people who are beginners,
Okay, I'll take
who are
it.
about to
But
start
it
the
just
Quran.
confused me, like,
Yeah.
why are you
So
saying
you don't need to get yourself confused. You are an advanced learner. So you see, for an advanced learner, this would not be my advice. I would ask you to go to the fourth step, learn Quranic Arabic and then try to understand the Quran. I was actually making this point for people who would like to become more regular in reading the Quran.
Okay. Okay, what about the first one?
I forgot your first question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to attack you. The first one was that why didn't Allah
Oh,
save
yeah,
those
I remember
books,
now.
right?
I think that the reason that comes to my mind is that when prophets were coming, the Almighty did not need to safeguard the books, because you see, every time there would be a corruption or something which would be implanted in the book, the next prophet would be in a position to correct that. Since the institution of prophethood was continuing, the books were not preserved or partly preserved, because every time something happened, the next prophet would set it right. But once the institution of prophethood was to be terminated, which meant that no other prophet would come, then there had to be a final book which had to be preserved. So this is what comes to my mind.
So this is a part of your thesis also, that because it was in a prophetic age,
Right,
there was no
prophetic
need
era.
to save
Right,
it like
yeah. There
Allah
was no.
did.
I mean,
maybe
there was a need, but it was not given that much importance, because you see, prophets of God, when they are alive, they are. I mean, they are more representative than the book itself, because the book is something which they bring down, and every next prophet is in a position to correct whatever wrong has been inflicted.
All right, thank you.
One thing that I'd also, I mean, just came to my mind when you just asked this question, and it might be of benefit to all of you, is how to become more punctual in our namaz, in our prayer. So I just want to take a little more time, because this is an important thing. Just as the Quran is very important in our lives, praying to God is also very important. So I'll just try to make a couple of points that might help all of us. First thing that important is that you must realize that why do we pray? What exactly is the reason that we pray? So if you realize that that the prayer that we offer is basically our thanksgiving and gratitude to God for all His favors, so we would immediately we would like to thank God, because you see, this is what happens in our own lives. When I give you a gift, your immediate reaction is to say thank you, and you would say, well, I'm going to return it in a better way. So what happens is that everything that we have in this world is also a gift of God. The only thing is, there is a curtain between God and us, and we don't realize that the origin of that gift is God, but there are other people who have become a means of that gift. For example, our parents, for example, our environment. But the origination is from God Himself. So the first thing to make you regular in your prayer is to realize that I'm praying to thank God, because this is something so natural that when someone gives something to me, I immediately leap up to say thank you to him. So if I realize that God is behind all my blessings, I'm going to leap up to say thank you to Him. The first point. The second point is, start praying one namaz a day. I mean, make yourself regular in one prayer a day. Slowly add maybe another prayer, and then another prayer. You don't need to start off with all the prayers at the same time. And the third is, start off with the obligatory part of the prayer, which is the farz prayer. All the rest, whether they're the sunnah the muqaddar or nafal, they're all optional. They're not going to, I mean, God is not going to be angry if you don't pray them. So start with the farz, do it one by one, and then finally, I mean, even before that, do understand what you say in your prayer, and you try to, because there is a very short thing. I mean, the prayer is something which is not that long, and because you read Surah Fatiha in every rakat, because you are reading so many kalamas in succession, that it's just a small amount of time that you can spend, and you can learn the meanings of the prayer. So these are a couple of things that might make us more regular and more conversant with the prayer, because since I was talking about God connection, so just as Quran connection is important to reach God, that prayer connection is also important to reach God.
Okay. One last question, then you're done.
Yeah,
I'll
go
ask.
ahead. Yeah.
So we always talk. You talked about charity. Zakat is not charity. Zakat is mandatory, right? Charity has to be something that is not mandatory,
Over and above zakat.
over and above, right?
Right.
Because if
Right.
I'm
So the
obligated,
obligatory part of charity is called zakat,
right?
and the over and above part is something that you can give all the time. So it's called infaq
Because
by the
in
Quran.
lots of translation, I see that it says waqimu salawat zakat. It doesn't define sadaqah as a separate thing, right?
I mean, these are terms which people have taken up, and there can always be an explanation, because translation is a challenge in itself, and people have different approaches to translation. Otherwise, we just need to understand the concepts for which the translation stand for.
Got it.
So at the beginning, and I think a lot of what you spoke about really spoke to me, and it was, wonderful. So thank you. But at the beginning, you spoke about one's consciousness
Right.
and one's ability to discern truth and, what feels right to you. And I was wondering how I know a lot of young people who've grown up learning things about the Quran and Islam from teachers and from school have maybe never actually read the Quran all that much. And in trying to understand the Quran better, there would probably become some places in which we have a conflict with our consciousness, which maybe our conscience is partially socially conditioned from like our society or from, American culture or Pakistani culture or whichever culture, right? And there's a solid chance that in the journey you would have a conflict with your
Right.
conscience. And how do we reconcile like what is our social conditioning,
Right.
and do you believe that we should look at the Quran as like completely literal in truth?
Right. That's a very good question. Actually, the Quran says that there is one thing as what we call basic morality. I mean, your conscience is tuned towards your basic morality. All the rest could be conditioned or could be acquired from the society. But the basic morality, which we can talk of, is actually mentioned in one place in the Quran. And it says that, Inna Allah ya'murukum bil adl wa ihsan wa ita izil kurba. So these are the three basic core values. Adl, which is justice; ihsan, goodness; and ita izil kurba, to be good to your kin. And yanha anil fahshai wal munkar wal bagh. Three things which are actually we are stopped from doing those. Yanha anil fahsha means obscenity, wal munkar something which is wrong, and wal baghi means rebellion. So three positives and three negatives. They constitute your basic morality. The rest is something which is acquired. It could be adaptations, it could be a conditioning. But as far as these six values are concerned, three positive and three negative, the Quran says they are ingrained in every human being to the same extent, unless a person goes after them and perverts them.
That makes sense. Another quick question. It's said in the Quran, I believe, like, verily we have sent messengers to all people. And I was wondering what your take was on sort of people that aren't like, like people like Aristotle or people who had teachings of God that were separate from the sort of Abrahamic tradition, and if you would consider them messengers.
Well, I think the life that we have come to know about these messengers, they don't, in spite of their brilliance and their high academic, being high academicians, they don't seem to qualify for prophets of God. But I do think that, for example, in Hindus, we have the earliest book of the Hindus are the Veds. I mean, if you've read the Veds, they are now available on the internet. They are full of tawheed, they are full of monotheism, and which does show that Hinduism itself started off with monotheism. And there are a lot of people who think that they were influenced by the teachings of Noah, the time of Noah, the flood when it came, and the part in which he was sent. Sort of, it does seem that it has a lot of influence on them. and the present form of Hinduism, which is called polymorphic monotheism. That's the new name of Hinduism. Polymorphic monotheism is something which was much later, in which it was, I mean, it came to this shape. And for example, in the Upanishads, in the Ramayana, in the Mahabharata, all these legends that they talk about. Otherwise, in their original book, it was all monotheism. It does speak of the fact that perhaps some prophet either was sent to them, or maybe the influence of Noah was such strong that they had those teachings. So the Quran actually says, "Likulli ummatin rasul." To every nation we did send a messenger. And therefore it does seem that, and the Quran also says that there are many messengers whose names we have not mentioned in the Quran. Just about 20 or 30 of them which are mentioned. So there could be a number of other messengers which could have come to other nations. And I do believe, especially in the Far East, for example, there must have been messengers which the Quran has not actually mentioned. And the Quran has also mentioned the reason that why it has not mentioned certain other prophets. It says, because God says, because I'm talking to these Arabs, so I'm going to talk about all those prophets about which they are aware of, because by reflecting on their history, the Quran is trying to stop the Quraysh in repeating that history themselves. So that this could have only been done if only those prophets would have been mentioned about which the Arabs were aware of. Otherwise, mentioning prophets which might have come in, for example, Far East or some other part of the world, it wouldn't have made sense to the Arabs because they did not know them.
Got it. One last question. Sorry, one
Right.
last one.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so basically, a lot of times people will believe that Allah has done something in their life, and in the Quran, there's frequent mention of God having, sort of had some sort of intervention in societies, or like Thamud, like all sorts of situations in which like people were like entire societies were punished, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Is it at all a worthwhile exercise for us to try to make sense of like what the present day is with
Right.
God
Oh, yeah.
intervening, or do we sort of
I
put
think
that
that's a
aside?
very, very important question that we need to address ourselves, because you see, until the prophets of God came, this was a common practice of God, and in the post-prophetic era, this practice is no longer there, and this actually relates to a law of God, and that is that messengers of God are sent, and in their own times, lesser days of judgment are created on the face of the earth, so that those lesser days of judgment could verify that there is a greater day of judgment for people living in the post-prophetic era, people like us. So that intervention, which took place, as you rightly said, it took place in the forms of destruction of those past nations, and that destruction actually was, I mean, it resulted once they denied the truth intentionally. They became arrogant, they became rebellious, and they insisted on their polytheism. So the punishment of polytheism in the hereafter is, God says that He's not going to forgive polytheism. So in this world also, polytheism was not forgiven. And the way in which this was done was that first messengers of God were sent. They actually explained that, well, polytheism has no basis. It was only God who could have disclosed that He has partners, and He never did so. So how come you do so? So this is through these messengers, the truth is made evident. And once they persist on their denial, they are punished in this world through natural disasters. So basically, it's a phenomena which is specific to the prophetic era. And that prophetic era, you are able to discern right and wrong in the lifetime of a prophet through God Himself. But this is no longer the case in the post-prophetic era. Our judgment has been deferred to the day of judgment. Their judgment took place in their own lives.
Got it. Thank you.
Just a quick question. What is the main reason of termination of uh, sending
Prophet.
new prophet, or the prophethood? Is that because the human intellect has reached to a certain point, or is it something else?
Well, I don't think, because human intellect maybe was far superior in earlier people. It does seem to me that human civilization reached a certain stage in which the message of a prophet could become a universal message, and it could be transferred to all mankind. So prior to the last prophet, this was not the case, because there were people who were localized, people who were given this responsibility, and they failed that responsibility. Although we too are failing at the moment, but it does seem that there was a certain period of time in which the truth, or the I would say veracity of the last prophet was something which became a palpable reality, and people now had to have an excuse to deny him. I mean, it was something which now had been communicated. Now any person who has a legitimate excuse can only be, I mean, maybe given concession. Otherwise, as far as communicating this fact is concerned, that there was a final prophet and he was given this final guidance is concerned, at a certain point of time, it was made possible. And precisely for this reason, the Quran was also preserved, so that it could be a substitute for the rest of, mankind once the last prophet passes away.
Thank you. Anybody?
We can have dua, I believe. At the tail end, we will have a dua.
Sure, if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm asking you.
I don't know, but if you want, I can do so.
I think we all would be enshrined.
Okay.
Dua coming from you.
Okay. So let me know if you just need to do dua now.
Any more questions?
Yeah, we are all like this.
You have a question? Yeah, small question. So you were talking about the first step, I think, was a good introduction to the Quran, and to find a good one and all that. If you could just give a brief one, possibly, I know it's a very difficult task.
It will take a lot of time to give you a brief introduction. So maybe, I mean, if you have the book, which is called Beginner's Guide to the Quran, I don't know if it's available here or not, but you can order it on the internet. It's called A Beginner's Guide to the Quran. And it's a very small, 50-page book, which will take you through the Quran, and you'll feel as if you've just gone through it.
Beginner's Guide to the Quran.
Right.
Thank you.
One question. When you describe in your book, you say there are 7 or 8 characters. Jibreel is talking, Allah is talking, Prophet is talking, other people are talking. I get confused how to identify sometimes in some ayats, like who's talking, who's addressing,
Right.
who's the addresser.
Yes. So I think the best way would be, again, if either you consult a good tafsir or a good scholar, or, as I said, this is the task of a person who knows good Quranic Arabic. If you know good Quranic Arabic, you'll not get confused, because it's like, I mean, it's so easy for you to understand that who is talking to whom. In the absence of a good grasp of Quranic Arabic, one does at times tends to get confused, or might be having a couple of opinions. But as I said, in that case, you can consult. There are a couple of the seeds that I can recommend to you in this case. For example, the Tadabbur Quran of Amin Hasan Islahi, or Al-Bayan of Ghamidi Sahib, because they try to decipher the fact that who is talking to whom on all occasions, especially when there could be a confusion.
So I did try to learn that. I'm not that great, but I'm getting there.
Right.
So I do break down that. But there are a couple of ayats, it's just very confusing. Even if you look at
Maybe you can discuss with me personally whenever you have the time.
Even if you look at some of the tafsir, there are differences.
There are. But then you see, this is the case with every discipline of knowledge. Tafsir is a human discipline. God never wrote tafsir. People did. So this is going to happen in medical science. It's going to happen in engineering. It's going to happen everywhere. Wherever there are human beings, there's bound to be a difference of opinion. You have to exercise your own judgment. In maybe
If I'm being wrong.
no. But you see, God says that if you are sincere in your judgment, even if you make a wrong judgment, you'll not be penalized for that. As long as you're sincere and not.
I'm taking liberties. All right, thank you.